Belgium is less of a country and more of a historical compromise, a geographical speed bump invented by the British in 1830 just to keep the French and the Germans from murdering each other. Spoiler alert, it didn't work. Twice. Belgium sits awkwardly between France, Germany, Luxembourg and the Netherlands. It's a patch of land so famously flat that invading armies basically treat it as a slip and slide. The weather is a relentless character-building grey, punctuated by aggressive drizzle, and yet this damp little buffer state is the beating bureaucratic heart of Europe. To understand Belgium, you must first accept that it doesn't actually want to exist. The country is split down the middle by a linguistic border that makes the Korean demilitarized zone look like a friendly garden fence. In the north, you have Flanders. They speak Flemish, which sounds like Dutch with a sore throat, and they make all the money. In the south, you have Wallonia. They speak French, possess all the hills, and exist in a state of post-industrial melancholy. The two halves despise each other. They don't watch the same television. They don't vote for the same politicians. And if they could physically saw the country in half and float away, they would. 58% of the country lives in the north and resents paying for the south. 32% lives in the south and resents the north for pointing it out. And 10% lives in Brussels, trying to drown out the noise of both. Because they can never agree on absolutely anything, Belgium currently holds the world record for the longest time a democratic nation has gone without an official government, 541 days. And the most interesting part? The country functioned really fine without one. Despite all of this, or perhaps because of it, nearly 10 million visitors come here every year. Why? Because the Belgians, while entirely incapable of fixing their own potholes, have somehow mastered the things that actually make life tolerable. And they make the best chocolate on earth. Belgium is deeply confusing and aggressively bureaucratic. It is a glorious dysfunctional miracle that this place hasn't completely imploded. Now, let's go take a closer look. Brussels is the capital of Belgium, the capital of the European Union in everything but official paperwork, and one of the worst cities in Europe to actually try driving through. Just over 1.2 million people live in the Brussels capital region itself, with more than 2 million across the wider metropolitan area. The city's origins are unglamorous by design. Brussels was first recorded in the 10th century as Bruxelles, Frankish for settlement in the marshes, which is as romantic as it sounds. A fortified island in the River Seine, established in 979 by Charles, Duke of Lower Lorraine, grew steadily into the capital of the Duchy of Brabant, then into one of the wealthiest trading towns in the Low Countries. Then, in 1695, into a smoking ruin, after King Louis XIV of France bombarded it almost entirely flat in a fit of continental pique. The city's guilds rebuilt the main square within a few years, in the gilded, over-decorated style you see today. The Seine itself, meanwhile, the river the entire city was founded around, eventually became such an unbearable, disease-ridden open sewer that 19th century Brussels solved the problem in the most Belgian way imaginable. It simply built over it. Between 1867 and 1871, the city vaulted the river into an underground tunnel and paved grand boulevards directly on top, on the reasonable but slightly unhinged logic that a health crisis you can no longer see is a health crisis you no longer have. Baudelaire, who lived in Brussels for a miserable stretch and detested nearly everything about it, is on record describing the Seine as one of the foulest rivers on the continent, which is an impressive insult from a Frenchman about a city he was a guest in. The river is technically still down there, running beneath the traffic in total darkness. Belgium didn't actually finish properly treating its own wastewater until 2007, a full century and a half after deciding the smartest fix was simply refusing to look at the problem any longer. Brussels sits almost exactly in the centre of Belgium. The city climbs from a lower town to an upper town, a hill's worth of elevation apart. The lower town, hugging the old buried riverbed, was historically where the merchants and workers all lived, while the upper town, a short but noticeably uphill walk away, is where the aristocracy built their palaces, specifically so they wouldn't have to smell the Seine. Brussels also happens to sit directly on the linguistic fault line between Flanders and Wallonia, an officially bilingual island of just over 1 million people marooned inside a Flemish region whose own politicians, left to their own devices, would probably rather it wasn't there. The Brussels capital region broke its own separate record in 2025, spending well over 500 days without a regional government of its own, none of which stopped the European Union from putting its actual government here. Brussels is home to the European Commission, the Council of the European Union, and a seat of the European Parliament. It hosts NATO's headquarters besides, which collectively earns it the unofficial title of Capital of Europe. The European Commission's headquarters, the Berlaymont, a vast cross-shaped tower built in the late 1960s, has been affectionately nicknamed the Berlaymonster by generations of people who work inside it, which tells you everything you need to know about staff morale. Building the entire European quarter required demolishing large stretches of handsome 19th century Brussels to make way for glass office blocks, a process so aggressively unlovely it has its own dedicated term in Belgian, Brusselisation, now used internationally as shorthand for a city vandalising its own architecture in the name of progress. What Brussels lacks in political efficiency, it compensates for with extreme caloric density. The food here is an exercise in shortening your lifespan. You should try the Belgian fries. They are thick cut, fried twice in beef tallow, and served in a paper cone with a huge amount of mayonnaise. Brussels' most famous resident is, improbably, a small bronze boy having a wee. The mannequin Pers began life in the 15th century as an ordinary drinking water fountain, was recast in bronze in 1619, and has since been stolen so many times that the version currently on public display is a replica. The original hides safely in a museum. If you want something larger, you must leave the historic centre and travel north to the Atomium. Built for the 1958 World's Fair, this is a 102-metre tall model of an iron crystal, magnified 165 billion times. Like the Eiffel Tower, it was only ever meant to be temporary. Unlike most temporary structures, Belgium simply never got around to taking it down, and now it's the second most photographed thing in the country, after a small urinating statue. Brussels also insists, with a straight face, that it is the world capital of the comic strip, an argument that gets much more persuasive once you learn Tintin and the Smurfs are both homegrown Belgian exports, and that entire building facades across the city have been turned into public comic murals. As a tourist destination in its own right, Brussels has always played a slightly awkward second fiddle to Bruges and Ghent, Belgium's two much smaller, much prettier medieval showpieces up the road. Even so, more than 3 million visitors a year make it the single most visited city in the country, though a fair proportion of them are technically here for a conference on agricultural subsidies rather than the architecture. Getting around any of this, unfortunately, is where Brussels falls apart. According to recent European transport data, Brussels is now the single most congested city in the entire European Union, worse than Warsaw, worse than Paris, with drivers losing well over 100 hours a year simply sitting still on roads that were never built for the volume of traffic a capital of Europe generates. Attempts to fix this, including a 2024 plan to push cars out of the centre in favour of bicycles, were met with actual protests from local businesses. Getting to Brussels in the first place, at least, is refreshingly simple, right up until you discover there are two airports that both go by the name. Brussels Airport in Zaventem is the real one, with a train station directly beneath the terminal and a service into the city centre in well under 20 minutes, for a fare that conveniently includes a surcharge literally called the Diabolo. Brussels international visitors more often arrive by train through Brussels Midi, the Eurostar and Thalys terminus, with direct connections to London, Paris, Amsterdam and Cologne. Brussels is, in the end, a genuinely improbable capital, chaotic, richer in bureaucracy than in road capacity, and run by people with just about enough of a sense of humour about their own dysfunction to make up for it. Before we continue this journey, please hit the like button to support our channel. Bruges is a city of under 120,000 people in West Flanders, 15 kilometres inland from the North Sea. The story begins, as these things often do in Flanders, with a flood. In 1134, a storm surge carved a new tidal channel called the Zwin straight through to the North Sea, connecting what had been a modest regional town directly to international shipping almost overnight. The merchants seized the opportunity immediately. By the 13th century, the city was the most important trading hub in northern Europe, importing wool from England and Scotland and exporting it as cloth to the rest of the continent. Merchants from across Europe gathered so reliably outside the house of the Van der Beurse family that the family name became the word for stock exchange in half a dozen languages. The 15th century brought a second golden age, and most of the halls still standing on the mark today, funded by a level of civic wealth that Bruges would not see again for 500 years. Then, with grimly comic timing, the Zwin that had made Bruges rich started silting back up almost as soon as everyone had gotten used to being rich. Through the late 15th and early 16th centuries, the channel filled with sediment faster than anyone could dredge it out. Ships got too big to reach the docks, and the merchants did exactly what merchants always do. They left, mostly for Antwerp, which happened to sit on a river that stayed navigable. A punishing Spanish trade policy, plus a tidy round of religious wars between Catholics and Protestants, and the collapse was total. By the time Belgium became an independent country in 1830, Bruges had the humiliating distinction of being its poorest city, a place too broke to modernise and too broke to demolish its own medieval centre, which turned out, eventually, to be the best thing that ever happened to it. While Antwerp, Brussels and Ghent tore down their old buildings and put up whatever passed for progress at the time, Bruges simply couldn't afford the wrecking ball, so the entire city sat frozen, slowly transforming from a national embarrassment into a UNESCO World Heritage Site nobody had to lift a finger to preserve. 19th century visitors started arriving specifically to stare at what they called, not unkindly, the Dead City. It has been very much alive again ever since, mostly at the expense of everyone who actually lives there. The city is wrapped in a network of canals. Historically, of course, these were open sewers where locals tossed their chamber pots, industrial waste, dead animals, and the occasional political rival. Today, they are filled with flat-bottomed tourist boats. You will pay €15 to sit shoulder to shoulder with strangers in plastic ponchos while a bored college student recites the exact same 5 jokes in 3 different languages. It is mandatory. Just sit there, look at the weeping willows, and pretend you don't notice the local residents glaring at you from their living room windows. This canals that give Bruges its Venice of the North reputation began life as the River Raya, reshaped over the centuries into the ring and crosstown network you see today. They are shallower than they look, typically only 1.5 meters to 2 meters deep, kept calm and mirror flat by a system of sluice gates that regulate the flow, which makes every boat tour photo look professional. While on the canal, you will see the famous swans of Bruges. In 1488, the locals got fed up with the heavy taxes imposed by the Holy Roman Emperor, Maximilian of Austria. So, they kidnapped him. Then, just to make a point, they beheaded his trusted advisor right in front of him. The advisor's name was Peter Lancals, which translates to long neck. When Maximilian eventually got his power back, he punished the entire city by decreeing they must keep long necks, swans, on their lakes and canals forever, at their own expense. Over 500 years later, the taxpayers of Bruges are still buying bread for his vengeance birds. And if Maximilian could look down at a modern Belgian payslip and see the state casually extracting 53%, he would be somewhat proud. Water gets topped up via the Ghent-Bruges Canal, itself linked to the Bruges-Zeebrugge Canal, completed in 1907 on the personal orders of King Leopold II in a doomed last attempt to drag the city back into serious international shipping. It failed almost immediately. The railway had already made the entire multi-year engineering project pointless before the concrete had properly set. Its one lasting achievement was Zeebrugge, the port that now delivers several million tourists a year by an entirely different method than the one Leopold actually had in mind. The attractions themselves cluster within about 10 minutes' walk of the market. The belfry, a 13th century bell tower standing over the main square, comes with 366 narrow medieval steps to the top. The Church of Our Lady houses Michelangelo's Madonna and Child, one of the very few Michelangelo sculptures to leave Italy during his own lifetime, which somehow ended up in a modest Flemish church rather than anywhere more prestigious, largely thanks to a wealthy local merchant family with more money than modesty. All of which has produced a serious over-tourism problem for a city this size. Millions of those visitors arrive by cruise ship via Zeebrugge, spend 2 or 3 hours photographing the same 4 landmarks, and leave without spending a cent on anything that isn't a waffle or a fridge magnet. The mayor has publicly warned that Bruges risks turning into, in his words, a complete Disneyland, and has responded by capping cruise ship arrivals at 2 a day, down from 5, banning new hotels in the historic centre, blocking new short-term rental permits citywide, and quietly pulling the city's own tourism adverts from Brussels Airport. Local shopkeepers have pointed out, not unreasonably, that there are no longer any butchers or bakers left for actual residents to shop at, only chocolate and souvenir shops. Once you're actually inside Bruges, the correct method of transport is your own 2 feet. The entire historic centre can be crossed in about 30 minutes, and the cobbled streets, while extremely photogenic, are not designed for anyone in heels or a hurry. Bikes are the sensible second option. Buses mostly shuttle between the station and the centre rather than around it, and driving is not worth attempting. You should get up early before the cruise crowds arrive and see the Markt and the canals in something approaching peace, climb the belfry despite the queue, and eat some chocolate. Bruges is atmospheric. When the fog rolls in off the canals, the summer crowds have retreated, the air bites at your face, and the town reclaims its moody, melancholic glory. Just don't expect the swans to like you. They still remember Peter. Located in the Flemish region of northern Belgium, along the banks of the Scheldt River, Antwerp is a massive logistics hub and the second largest port in Europe. It is a place of sharp contrasts. You will see 16th century Gothic architecture standing next to 1970s concrete monstrosities and people wearing €2,000 designer coats eating mayonnaise-drenched potatoes out of a cardboard cone. Let us begin with the name. According to local legend, a giant named Antihone once charged a toll to ships crossing the river. If a captain refused to pay, the giant chopped off his hand and tossed it into the water. Eventually, a Roman soldier named Silvius Brabo, the nephew of Julius Caesar, defeated the giant, cut off the giant's hand, and threw it into the river instead. In Dutch, handwerpen means to throw a hand. Handwerpen became Antwerpen. There's now a bronze fountain of Brabo mid-throw in the main square, and a beloved local biscuit shaped like a hand sold in bakeries across the city. In the 1500s, this was the richest commercial city in the world. Pepper, silver, and textiles flowed through the docks. Then, in 1576, the Spanish army arrived. They had not been paid by their king, so they decided to pay themselves by burning the city to the ground and massacring thousands of residents in an event known as the Spanish Fury. Not the most obvious way to collect a paycheck, but nobody ever accused the Spanish army of subtlety. Antwerp joined the Dutch revolt in outrage, held out for nearly a decade, and then lost anyway. A Spanish siege starved the city into surrender in August 1585. The Protestant population was given a few years to settle its affairs and leave, and most of them did. They took their money, their skills, and Antwerp's entire golden age with them, straight up the coast to Amsterdam, which said thank you very much, and got rich instead. The river was then blockaded for good measure on and off for the better part of 2 centuries. Antwerp spent the 1600s and 1700s staring at its own front door from the inside. It took Napoleon to properly bother reviving the place, not out of any love for Flemish culture, but because he is said to have called the port a pistol aimed at the heart of England, and built the docks to prove it. When Belgium became independent in 1830, Antwerp came with it, and the port boomed all over again once Belgium finally bought out the Dutch tolls on the river in 1863. By the 1960s, the port was booming again. The diamond trade was back in business. Speaking of diamonds, 84% 94% of the world's rough diamonds, and roughly half of all polished ones, pass through a district here barely a square mile in size. It's been this way for the better part of 5 centuries, ever since merchants first started bringing stones in from India. You cannot just walk in and look around. If you loiter in the diamond district, a man with an earpiece will look at you. If you continue to loiter, police officers will ask you to explain yourself, which makes it all the more satisfying that in February 2003, a gang of Italian thieves, led by a man named Leonardo Notarbartolo, cracked open a vault protected by heat sensors, motion detectors, a seismic alarm, and a lock with 100 million possible combinations, and walked out with somewhere north of $100 million in diamonds and jewellery. Almost none of it was ever recovered. It remains the largest diamond heist in recorded history. The port of Antwerp-Bruges, formed in 2022 when Antwerp merged with the already mentioned coastal port of Zeebrugge, is Europe's second busiest port, shifting close to 290 million tons of cargo a year. It also has the largest integrated chemical and petrochemical cluster in Europe, over 40 square kilometres of refineries, crackers and pipelines, housing most of the world's 10 biggest chemical companies in one place. Getting to Antwerp is very easy, provided you take the train, and you should take the train solely to experience the arrival. Antwerpen Centraal Station is arguably the most spectacular railway station on the planet. Built at the turn of the 20th century under King Leopold II, it is a colossal dome of iron, glass and 20 different types of marble. If you decide to drive to Antwerp, you deserve the misery that awaits you. The city is surrounded by the Ring Road, a notoriously congested motorway where commercial lorries from across the continent idle in a permanent state of gridlock. The historic centre is compact and largely pedestrianised, filled in by trams and an underground pre-metro for the longer hops. Rome, as it happens, has 7 hills. Antwerp has none. This is Flanders, flat, low, largely reclaimed from marsh and river mud by people who treated coastline as more of a suggestion than a fact. The city sits on the River Scheldt, a tidal waterway that loops through the centre on its way to the North Sea. In the historic centre, the Cathedral of Our Lady dominates the skyline. The stone tower is 123 metres high. It's a masterpiece of Gothic stonemasonry. It is also visibly asymmetrical. The original architectural plans called for 2 identical towers, but the construction budget ran out in 1521. If you prefer your architecture aggressively modern, you can walk to the Eilandia district to see the Maas Museum aan de Stroom. It is a 60-metre tall tower constructed from red Indian sandstone and undulating glass panels. The museum holds 500,000 maritime and historical artefacts, but the main reason people enter the building is to use the escalators to bypass the boring exhibits entirely and reach the panoramic rooftop. Tourism here is fundamentally different from places like Bruges. There are no groups of tourists being violently herded into overpriced lace shops. Instead, Antwerp attracts a demographic of people who wear angular black glasses and drop terms like postmodern textile integration into ordinary conversations. This is because Antwerp is a global fashion hub thanks to the Antwerp Six, a group of avant-garde designers who emerged in the 1980s and established the city as a destination for people who want to spend the equivalent of a monthly mortgage payment on a shirt that looks deliberately torn. If you visit Antwerp, you must adhere to the local code of conduct. Dress well. Do not attempt to speak French. The locals speak it fluently, but will refuse to acknowledge you purely out of historical spite. Speak English or attempt Dutch, and try to adopt the same quiet, unearned arrogance that the residents possess. If you look at a map of Belgium, Dinant is located in the southern French-speaking region of Wallonia. If you look at it in person, it's located in a geographical hostage situation. It is a town squeezed entirely into a narrow sliver of land between the dark, cold waters of the Meuse River and a massive sheer wall of limestone cliff. There is almost no room for a town here. A sensible population would have taken one look at this claustrophobic ravine and kept walking. The residents of Dinant Dinant, however, decided to build houses, a massive church and a fortress. They created a town that spends half the day in shadow and the other half waiting for a rock slide. Historically, living in Dinant has been a really bad idea. Because of its position on a major river in a narrow valley, it was a strategic choke point. If an army was marching across Europe, they inevitably marched through Dinant, and they usually burned it down on their way. In 1466, Charles the Bold, the Duke of Burgundy, took offence to a local rebellion. He sacked the town, burned the buildings, tied 800 citizens together in pairs and chucked them into the river. A textbook example of medieval conflict resolution. Centuries later, in August 1914, the invading German army arrived. They fought a bloody battle against the French, during which a young, completely unknown French lieutenant named Charles de Gaulle was shot in the leg. The history of Dinant is essentially a chronicle of people rebuilding a town just in time for a foreign military to set it on fire. When you arrive, the first thing you will notice is the saxophone. Adolphe Sax, the inventor of the saxophone, was born in Dinant in 1814. He created an instrument that looks like a complicated brass plumbing fixture and sounds in the wrong hands like a distressed goose. The town of Dinant has never moved past this single historical data point. The main bridge crossing the river is named the Charles de Gaulle Bridge, which is a nice tribute, except it is lined on both sides with giant, garishly painted fiberglass saxophones. Sitting directly over the town is the citadel. It was built by the Dutch in 1815 to keep the French out, which was an entirely pointless endeavour, since the French just keep arriving anyway as tourists. To get to the citadel, you have two choices. You can pay to take a small, terrifyingly steep cable car, or if you enjoy unnecessary physical suffering, you can climb the 408 stone steps cut directly into the cliff face. It will destroy your knees exactly like the bullet that hit de Gaulle, but nobody is going to build a bronze statue of you. Once at the top, you get a splendid view of the river valley and a museum of weaponry. Directly at the base of the cliff sits the Collegiate Church of Notre Dame. It is an imposing Gothic building with a highly distinctive pear-shaped bell tower. In 1227, a massive piece of the limestone cliff simply detached itself and fell, crushing the original Romanesque church and claiming lives of a few dozen people. Rather than moving the church 30 meters to the left, the survivors just rebuilt it in the exact same spot. If you're hungry, Dinant offers a local culinary specialty called the Couquet de Dinant. It is a decorative biscuit made entirely of wheat flour and honey. That sounds lovely until you attempt to eat one. The mixture is baked at extremely high temperatures, resulting in a biscuit that has the exact structural integrity of Kevlar. It's probably the leading cause of dental trauma in Wallonia. Do not bite into it. Just buy one, take it home and use it as a coaster. A train from Brussels takes you to Dinant in 90 minutes, usually requiring a quick change at Namur. The railway station deposits you right across the river from the main cluster of buildings. If you insist on driving, you will quickly discover the primary flaw of a town built in a narrow ravine. There is nowhere to put a car. Parking spaces here are rarer than a quiet day in 1914. If Dinant is Belgium's postcard, Liege is the country's actual personality, and the two are not on speaking terms. This is a bigger, louder, less photogenic city, 60 kilometers northeast of Dinant, along the same put-upon Meuse, at the point where it meets the Ourthe River. This is the commercial and cultural capital of Wallonia. The history of Liege is uniquely bizarre. For 800 years, it wasn't actually part of the surrounding Netherlands or Belgium. It was the Prince Bishopric of Liege, an independent sovereign state ruled entirely by the Catholic Church. For over a century, it was one of the most important steel and coal hubs in all of Europe. Wealth poured in, blast furnaces lit up the night sky, and the locals earned the nickname the Fiery City. Then the heavy industry collapsed. Today, Liege is just the Rust Belt of Belgium. 200,000 people live within the city limits. Namur is the official capital of Wallonia, but nobody in when Liege has ever quite accepted this. You will likely arrive by train, which brings us to the Liege-Guillemins railway station. It is impossible to miss. Designed by the Spanish architect Santiago Calatrava, it looks like the gleaming white ribcage of a futuristic whale. It cost over 300 million euros, took over a decade to build, and is universally hailed as an architectural masterpiece. It also has no walls. In a country historically famous for freezing and horizontal rain, an architect built a 300 million euro train station with no walls. Sounds like a good idea. High-speed trains from Brussels take as little as 44 minutes direct, with a service every 20 minutes throughout the day. If you're looking for attractions, the city offers the Montagne de Buren. These stairs connect the old town to the hill where Liege's own citadel once stood, mostly gone now, swallowed by a hospital. There are 374 steps at a 30% incline, built in 1881 so that soldiers stationed at the hilltop citadel could get down to the city centre quickly without having to walk through the dangerous dark alleys. It's free, open around the clock, and regularly listed among the most punishing staircases in the world. Along the banks of the brown, fast-moving Meuse River, you will find occasional flashes of 19th century elegance, entirely suffocated by 1970s brutalist concrete apartment blocks. These are buildings designed by people who clearly viewed natural light as a weakness. The grey, brooding atmosphere of Liege has produced some highly specific cultural exports. Georges Simenon, one of the most widely read authors of the 20th century, and the creator of the famous fictional detective Jules Maigret, was born and raised here. If you stand by the banks of the Meuse River in late November, watching the grey rain hammer against the brutalist concrete while a thick mist rolls in from the abandoned steelworks, you will immediately understand why. It is an environment that practically demands you invent a gruesome homicide just to pass the time. Getting around Liege is slightly chaotic. For the past several years, the defining feature of modern Liege has not been a cathedral or a monument, it has been a trench. In a fit of 21st century optimism, the municipal government decided to build a modern tram network. That was many years ago. Today, the entire city centre is one continuous muddy excavation site. The people who inhabit this endless construction site are an interesting demographic. The Liégeois do not share the reserved, quiet demeanour of their northern neighbours. They are loud, they are intensely sociable, and they are aggressively combative. This is a population that runs almost entirely on strong coffee. Modern Liege is no longer the steel forging powerhouse of the 1900s. The blast furnaces are mostly cold. Instead, the city has reinvented itself as the logistical warehouse of Europe. Liege Airport is now one of the busiest cargo airports on the continent. It operates 24 hours a day, flying in billions of cheap plastic electronics and fast fashion garments from Asia. When you order a remarkably cheap laser-guided nose hair trimmer that will almost certainly catch fire upon arrival, it is highly likely it passes through Liege. The city has transitioned from the heroic age of heavy industry to the slightly depressing age of next-day delivery. Ghent sits in East Flanders, of which it's the capital, at the confluence of the Scheldt and the Lye rivers. It's Belgium's third largest city after Brussels and Antwerp, and it comes with its own port, the country's third biggest, linked to the North Sea by canal. Ghent is also, notably, one of the few major Belgian cities where the tourist coaches haven't fully arrived. The city gets left comparatively alone, which the people here seem to regard as both an insult and a relief. Historically, Ghent was an absolute powerhouse. In the 13th century, thanks to the lucrative cloth trade, it was the second largest city in Northern Europe, surpassed only by Paris. It was fabulously wealthy, and because of this wealth, the locals developed a superiority complex. Ghent, it should be said, has never had much patience for anyone getting ideas above their station, including, as it turns out, itself. That self-regard reached its most spectacular own goal in the year 1500, when Ghent produced its most famous native son. Charles, born in a palace that no longer stands, who grew up to become Holy Roman Emperor, King of Spain, and ruler of an empire so large the sun famously never set on it. You might expect a hometown boy done that good to be generous with his birthplace. Instead, when Ghent refused a war tax in 1539, Charles marched home with 5,000 soldiers, accepted the city's surrender without a fight, and staged a punishment procession so humiliating it's still talked about 5 centuries on. Officials paraded barefoot, and at the very back, 50 ordinary citizens walked the streets in white shirts with actual hangman's nooses around their necks, symbolizing that they deserved to hang. The city's ancient rights were stripped outright. Charles, not a man to do things by halves, then had a permanent fortress built over a demolished abbey, specifically to keep watch on everyone. Ghent's own archaeologists rediscovered its foundations only recently, underneath, of all things, an apartment block. Belgium, it's worth noting, appears to run on an entire subgenre of dukes and emperors named Charles, who exist purely to ruin your day. In nearly 850 years of standing on the same spot, the Gravestein, Ghent's moated, turreted, thoroughly medieval castle of the Counts, has been successfully stormed exactly once. Not by a rival duke, not by a foreign army, but by university students in 1949 over a 1-cent rise in the price of beer. They stormed the castle, captured its sole guard, and locked him in a cupboard. All 138 were arrested. The beer tax, it should be said, stayed exactly where it was. A short walk from the castle is St. Bavo's Cathedral. From the outside, it is a magnificent example of Brabantine Gothic architecture. Inside, it houses the Adoration of the Mystic Lamb, also known as the Ghent altarpiece, painted by the Van Eyck brothers in 1432. It is widely considered one of the most important paintings in the history of art. It's also the most stolen artwork in human history. The correct way to spend time in Ghent is to walk it without an itinerary, along the Lier at dusk, across to the Vrijdagmarkt, and up the Belfry stairs. Comparisons to Bruges are inevitable and exhausting for everyone involved. Bruges is smaller, prettier, and essentially preserved as a museum piece. Ghent is a real city that happens to have a medieval core, rather than the other way round, with a student population of over 40,000, keeping the bars loud well past the hour Bruges rolls up its cobblestones. To recover from the sheer density of the history, you must seek out sustenance. However, because of the massive student population, finding traditional heavy Flemish cuisine in Ghent requires some skills. Ghent currently holds the title for the highest concentration of vegetarian restaurants per capita in Europe. If you are a carnivorous traveller hoping to sink your teeth into a greasy, artery-clogging slab of beef, you are in the wrong postal code. To survive a visit here, you must first understand the hierarchy of the streets. The municipal government has converted the entire historic core into the largest car-free zone in Europe. If you rent a vehicle and attempt to drive it to your hotel, a network of automated cameras will scan your license plate and issue a fine. Consequently, everyone walks. So, Flanders or Wallonia? What's your flavour of despair? Be honest and let us know in the comments. If you love what we do, please hit the like button and subscribe to World Travel Guide.